So what are we going to see today? We're going to talk about a few aspects of lesson planning. What are our challenges when we plan a lesson? What's the anatomy of a lesson plan? Identifying tasks and context in a lesson, and finally using our resources. And I call the resources the rock stars of a lesson. And so let's talk about a perfect lesson plan. And is there such a thing as a perfect lesson plan? I don't think so. There's days that I feel I had a horrible lesson, or that I personally feel that I could have done something different. And there's days that I'm like, oh my gosh, that went really well. And then there's also all the extrinsic factors that can happen, there can be outside factors, there can be interruptions. Last week, one of my classes was interrupted with a fire alarm, and we spent an hour outside of the building. So you never know what's going to happen. So thinking about a perfect lesson plan, it's an ideal, but personally, I don't feel it's realistic. But we try our best to do it as good as we can. So when I was planning this webinar, I reached out, and we can go to the next slide. I reached out through social media to other teachers across the country using one of the social media groups. And I said, what are your challenges when you plan a lesson? And I had all sorts of answers. And I think that today Clet also sent a survey, and I think that the answers are pretty similar. So some of the answers that I received are searching for relevant and school-appropriate cultural videos. It takes forever. And yes, I've gone down that rabbit hole. It takes forever because sometimes we like something and it turns out at the end it's not school appropriate, or we need to edit it, or things that make it not perfect and we need to find something else. Someone else says, figuring out an effective way to promote vocal engagement. I'm thinking this person wants their students to talk more, and that's not always easy. Even across one level, I have sections that are all chatty and love to speak Spanish. And because everybody knows I speak Spanish, I teach Spanish. And I have classes that just won't say a peep, no matter how strong the students are. It's a culture in the classroom, and sometimes making them talk, it's a challenge. The next one was, I don't know how long things will take. And this is very valid. This happens to me all the time. Sometimes I plan and whoa, that went too fast, and I have to fill 5 minutes, possibly with a game or possibly with some conversation. Or it turns out that the lesson went slower than I thought. So the timing is also very challenging. The next one says how to incorporate more cultural activities while learning the content. And I'm going to say to this person, if you're here, that's the gist. That's using culture to teach our context. It's it. I think that's a key piece. Without culture, we're not teaching a language. And lastly, somebody said addressing the three modes, the three modes of communication: interpersonal, presentational, interpretive. And yes, I think that sometimes when we're very busy teachers, and when we're planning a lesson, sometimes it's more about, I chat with my colleague next door, and it's about, so what do we do today? And it's not that, let's follow this format. But I think that in the end, there's a little bit of, yes, there's some organization even when we freak out. We know what we're doing. So next slide, please. So when I was thinking about what to present, I thought, what's the anatomy of a lesson plan? What are the parts or the components of a lesson when we are designing a lesson? What are the essential elements to consider? And so I did some research, after I did my research of asking around people and saying, what is it that you need to know? Or what are your challenges? I also, went to the World Wide Web, like all of us do. And I Googled, what is a lesson plan? And it's, I got a bunch of different answers. I really like the one that I'm going to show you in the next slide. And this is from the University of Michigan. So it's not New York, but I still like it. From the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching. And it does say a lesson plan is the instructor's roadmap of what students need to learn and how it will be done effectively during class time. And then I kept searching, and I did get something from a New York State presentation where I think it was Dr. O'Toole used similar words, the roadmap. So I felt, okay, if Dr. O'Toole is saying roadmap, then I'm not that far off. For those of you that are not from New York, Dr. O'Toole is one of the people that are behind the designing of the New York State New World Language Standards. And she's one of the rock stars, or the dream team, we call them. So the roadmap, it's essentially a word or a terminology that is used a lot to say in layman's terms, what is a lesson plan? And I like that. So next slide, please. So lesson plan as a roadmap talks about getting from point A to point B. So getting from the beginning of the lesson, and that's your starting point, to the end of the lesson. And that's the end point, or the goal. That is what you want your students to be able to do at the end of your lesson. The steps of the journey are your activities or tasks that we assign. The steps of the journey are all of those little things that we do to get the students engaged and to help them be successful and meet our goal. And every lesson has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. But yeah, those are the steps. We need steps. It's not free form. It has a logical order, if that makes sense to you. I hope it does. But also, and this one did not come from the World Wide Web, this one came from me. Next slide, please. To me, a lesson plan, it's a piece of a puzzle, because lesson plans are not isolated. It is part of a larger entity, and that entity is the unit. Each one of our lessons within a unit makes that unit complete. So each one of our units, of our lessons, have a purpose within the unit. So lessons stand alone, but lessons work together to form that big picture. And that big picture is the unit, the essential question or inquiry question that the unit has. So that's the value. That's why each lesson is so valuable, because each of our lessons together are going to bring our students to be able to meet the standards and meet the goals that we have at a unit. So we have to plan a lesson. What do we do? And when we do this in an ideal setting, we sit down and we have light in our desk and not a lot of other things going on. There's no phone calls. There's no need to go to a meeting or any other distractors. It's just, okay, let's sit and plan. But it usually happens in our hectic lives with many other things that are going on. But let's talk about what we should consider when we are planning a lesson. What is the lesson about? What is the focus of the lesson? Is it food? Is it school life? Is it identity? Is it social justice? What is the focus of the lesson? What is that big theme of our lesson? Then we should consider what language functions should we teach, and what are language functions? Language functions are those structures that we want the students to be able to use. Those structures that we want the students at the end of the lesson to include in their communication. Then what I like to call the rock star, and the rock star is what gets us excited. I don't know about you, but when I'm planning a lesson and I have an infographic that I really like, I'm so excited to share that infographic, or a video. If I have a video that I really, really like, today in the classroom, I used a video about volunteering. I'm so happy to have my students look at that video and interact with it and see what I want them to see. I'm excited to use that resource, because a resource, it's a bit of the world that I'm sharing with them. So I'm always very excited about the resource and how to make the most of it. And then I don't want to say in the end, but we should also consider what is the outcome. And that is tied to those language functions. What do I want my students to be able to do, to perform at the end of my lesson? Okay, so it's about having that rock star, but making that rock star authentic resource work for our students, because what's a good resource without making it work for our students? And we can move to the next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different parts of planning a lesson. And first of all, what is the lesson about? Like I said before, the lesson is a piece of a puzzle. So the lesson is a part of a larger anchor theme and topics. So for those of you that are not in New York, this is one of the moments when I say this is a little bit of what we do in New York, but it applies to everybody. We have big themes, kind of like the AP themes, if I may, and then there's subtopics. So the identity larger theme has to do with family, has to do with celebrations, has a bunch of smaller topics. Then we want to consider the inquiry question or essential question. And that's the big question that we have, that we want the students at the end of the unit to be able to answer. And our lesson is going to contribute to that inquiry question, but it may not fully answer it. And finally, we want to consider our proficiency targets, or our New York checkpoints. We have 3 checkpoints. The checkpoint A is our novice checkpoint. Our checkpoint B is more or less what it's a intermediate low to intermediate mid. And that's more or less what would be a language level 2 or 3. And then we have our what we call a checkpoint C, and those tend to be your AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses. Okay, all of these components, they come from the unit plan. So if you have a strong unit plan, you can take this directly for each of your lessons from your unit plan. Next slide, please. So then, now we have to go into the specifics. What is the focus of the lesson? So what is the title of your lesson? If you're doing a unit in identity and family, maybe the title of your lesson is describing the people in my family, or describing the persons in my family. And then you can talk about family relationships. So that focus of the lesson is the specific part of your theme that you are presenting in that lesson. Then you're going to talk about your can-do statements. And can-do statements are a language function. Remember, we talked about it before. This is what the kids can do with the language, the students can do with the language. And it needs an evidence. And what is the evidence? The evidence is the task where the students are going to perform that language function to make it evident that they can use the language effectively. Okay. And lastly, you're going to think about what standards or communicational modes are being purposely addressed in your unit? Is it a unit about understanding, interpretive communication? Is it a unit, is not unit, excuse me, is it a lesson about interpersonal communication? So you want to know exactly what you want your students to do in the lesson so they can perform that function and use the context, excuse me, I just blanked out, and use it in context so they are successful. And we can move to the next slide. Well, let's talk a little bit about language functions. And there you are, New York State. I'm quoting you because I essentially copied these words from some of the documents that I have to say, I go to that site constantly and I'm checking the webinars and I'm checking the documents because it's so much information that that we're getting and so many ideas that we can, and clarification. Sometimes I need to know exactly what is it that I need to do as a teacher. So language functions, like I said, are what students can do with the language. And students can understand, interpret, and analyze. Students can exchange information, express feelings, preferences, or opinion, and much more. This is just a tiny sample of some terms that I'm throwing in there so you can see, oh, this is what students can do by using the language effectively. Describe, inform, narrate, explain, and persuade, and they can identify and compare. And this is throughout all levels. So your novice students, your young elementary students, I see that we have a few elementary teachers, your IB students, they can all do some of these or all of these. But we as teachers, we have to figure out what is it that our students can actually do. And the next slide it's a chart that I absolutely love. I believe it comes from ACFEL. I heard also that Mr. Heller, Bill Heller, uses it a lot. That's another of our New York State legends. But I really like it because it's easy for me when I see Parrot, Survivor, and Reporter to figure out what is it that my students can do. So at a novice level, the students are parrots. They repeat a lot. They can practice certain things. They have a limited number of words. They speak in lists. There's a lot of repetition, not so much creation, but they're repeating. And what I love about these kids, the novice kids, that they feel so successful because they're able to say things in another language. But it's also a good reference because, again, it keeps me on my toes. Oh, these students are novice. I should focus on them identifying. I should focus on phrases. I could focus on having them maybe list characteristics of something when they are reading, or list when they're viewing. Also, they can make a little list. They can do very specific things. The Survivor, those are our level 2, level 3, and even sometimes level 4 students, and they can do so much more, but they're surviving. And that's, again, they can do more than just repeating, but they use their language in a way that is a little more sophisticated. They can do complete sentences. They can have simple conversations. They can create with a combination of memorized words and a little bit of a spontaneous communication. They can create their own questions. And they are like that. They are moving towards being a reporter. And the reporter is our AP kids. It's our advanced low kids, maybe your IB students also. They can participate in conversations more freely. They are able to be more spontaneous with the language. They can use multiple tenses, fewer errors. They can communicate well. And that's the ultimate goal for us as teachers. We want our kids to be able to communicate effectively, even with some mistakes. I feel that I'm very proficient English speaker, and I still make a lot of mistakes. So it's a good reference to keep in mind. And it's also to me, it's so easy to visualize the parent, the survivor, and the reporter that it grounds me when I'm planning a lesson. Oh, this is what my students need to do. Perhaps you have a graphic that works for you. There's quite a few out there. This is my favorite. I really like it, and I use it all the time as a reference. All right, so let's continue with language functions. And language functions are the first part of your can-do statement. And if you're not from New York, you're going to go, what do you mean first part? The language function, like I said, is what the student can do with the language, but they don't use the language in isolation. They use the language in a task within a context. So you want to add the evidence of that language function. In other words, you want to say how they're able to do that function, how they're able to use that piece of language structure that you want them to use. So your lesson needs specific language functions and evidence. And so our can-do statements are a little longer, but I highly recommend the practice because we don't not only state what the student can do, but we add the task and we add the context. And by doing that, we give it a full meaning to that can-do statement. So what about culture, you may ask? And culture is my favorite. I love teaching culture, and I love how culture sometimes makes us uncomfortable, but that's the beauty of it. Culture is the context. Culture is what makes our lessons live, what makes our lessons have a sense and make our lessons not something superficial or artificial. Let's move on to the next slide. And then we talk about resources. And what are the resources? Resources is the media piece. And that stuff that gets us excited, like a video or the infographic or an article that you will be using. To me, it's always the rock star of the lesson. It's what I'm so excited to have my students use and look at. And I don't always get the response I was hoping for. They, I'm not their age, so they don't always get excited about something that excites me. But I think it's the piece that puts the lesson together. Now, our rock star should remain unchanged, because if we change that authentic piece of media, and sorry, I didn't mention authentic before, but ideally, if something that is coming from a newspaper or any sort of media that is from a country where they speak the target language, and if we somehow alter it, it's not authentic anymore. So what we need to modify, what we need to design is the task. And to design the task, we have to consider, again, our students' proficiency level. We have to think about, am I working with a novice mid-level? Am I working with an intermediate high? What exactly is my student's level? And within a class, you're going to have multiple levels. So that's what makes it a little bit more challenging, but don't lose your resource. Use your resource and just find ways to make it work for your students. Next slide, please. So our student, that roadmap, our lesson, that roadmap must have a sequence. And the sequence, like we said before, that is something that is, again, it's pretty obvious, but sometimes with life we forget. We have to have a clear beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, we want to know, or we want to use what our students know. And I have some clear examples in the next couple of slides, but we want to use what our students know as our, jumping board that is going to help us present the new content. The middle, it's going to be the gist of your lesson, and you're going to focus on the functions you can address with the resource that is being used, how to make the most of that rock star, that resource. And then for the ending, you want to make sure that you are meeting your goal and that your students are being able of doing what you wanted them to do. So you wrap it up and you give your students a sense of accomplishment. You want your students to leave the classroom with a sense that, hey, I did something today. And that brings us to our can-do statements. So again, the ending, you come full circle. You think about, oh, your can-do statement. And you think of it, again, it's a circle, it's a map, but it's how you got from point A to point C with that resource in the middle. And we go to the next slide, and that's drawing the map, and that's structuring our lessons. So I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about the different parts. Beginning a lesson, like I said, you want to use what your students know, that previous knowledge. So at a novice level, let's say that we are teaching about La Casa Azul, Frida Kahlo's house museum. At a novice level, I would begin with the fact that the house is blue. And that's, at least where we live, it's not very common. So let's describe the house. You know, there's blue, there's red, there's some green from the plants, and you want to use cognates. They are able to understand the word museo. Even those of you that don't speak Spanish, you're understanding I'm talking about a museum. So at that level, begin with what the students know. And if they already know a little bit about parts of the house, you can talk about the window and the door, and you can make that work for you. By doing that, your students are feeling that it's not gibberish. It's not, you are not the teacher in Charlie Brown's classroom. It's not blah, 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 but they can actually use what they know to understand that picture. At an intermediate level, you can use a little bit more of that previous knowledge, and your students are going to be able to describe it. Some of them are probably able to tell that it's Frida Kahlo's house, Diego Rivera's, and you may take it from there, and you may ask further questions. And at a higher level, meaning by higher, an intermediate high or an advanced low, I'm thinking your AP students, your IB students, your dual enrollment higher level students, you can have a conversation on house museums. La Casa Azul is not the only house museum. I was thinking about other examples, and in the city of Madrid, there's a beautiful one, which is the house of the painter Sorolla, and it's beautiful. It has these gardens, and it's, again, it's a house that also serves the purpose of being a museum. And I'm sure in your regions, there are houses that are also museums, like in Washington, D.C., near Washington, D.C., I should say, in Virginia. I haven't visited, but I understand that the house of, oh my goodness, is it Lincoln's house? It's there, and it's supposed to be just incredible. So you can have a conversation on all these house museums. And please correct me if I said the wrong house. I think it's Lincoln's house. And their value for society, because these houses are not there just to look pretty. They teach us lessons. They are reminders of history. So your higher level students can do so much just by looking at that house and identifying it as Frida Kahlo's house museum. So the beginning of the lesson, once again, is for us to use, it's Jefferson's home. I knew I was going to mess it up. Thank you, Martha. The beginning of the lesson is definitely for us to use that prior knowledge and build from it. So next slide, please. The middle of the lesson, this is where our rock star is presented. This is where we are going to use our resource. You want to make sure you follow a structure, a language structure, when the input precedes the output. You want to model the language, not once, not twice. Oh, I already explained it. That is not going to put it in your student's head. You have to model, 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 repeat, repeat, repeat. And by doing that, it's going to get to them. and use different ways. You may model by saying, by writing on the board, by making them repeat. All of those ways, all that input going on and on and on and on, it's going to somehow lead to the output. But without input, there's no output. So you want to make sure that the input is always there. Encourage collaboration to reduce stress. I'm pretty sure that you're going to say, oh, we did this too. I do this all the time. Sometimes when we ask a question and we call students, we get that deer in headlights. But if we let them talk to each other, usually we get really good results. Remember, for students, this is a language that they don't know. So a lot of it, there's a lot of gibberish going on for them. And we want them to become the detectives that pick up the clues and are able to make sense of the language. But we have to give them the chance to process. We have to remember it's another language for them. It's something that they are learning. I also think that in the middle of the lesson, this is where you scaffold and or differentiate. I feel that the scaffolding helps a lot with giving them the pieces to process that resource. Let's say that you have an audio. The scaffolding is going to be giving them keywords that they need to identify. The scaffolding is going to be pausing to ask questions. The scaffolding is going to be maybe giving them pictures and words in the target language so they understand as they listen. So the scaffolding has different ways of working, but you want to provide a scaffold, especially the first time you give them the resource. And also differentiate, because no student, I'm sure that all of us know it, but no student is the same. So they are going to learn a little differently, and we want to give them choices, or we want to give them ways, support, so they learn what we want them to learn at their own pace. And be supportive. Support your students so they get that desired function and task done. Okay, they're not going to do it on your own. And sometimes I feel I'm repeating myself, but maybe that's all that input that I'm saying over and over again. It's going to guarantee that you get the message, that the message is coming across. And let's go to the end of the lesson. Don't forget your can-do statement. Your can-do statement was present all the time when you were modeling, when you were encouraging the students to talk to each other. That's your can-do statement in action. So remember that you want them to, don't forget that that's what you were aiming to. Consider a quick formative assessment. Just maybe a quick ticket to the door or a survey or some sort of end of the class conversation to make sure that your students are getting the purpose of the lesson. So the outcome, it's again, what you want them to, what's your ultimate goal, what you want your students to have done. Think again about the can-do statements. Think again about your student abilities. Don't go too high, don't go too low, because then you get the frustration on the board. The students that are bored. What you wish to achieve with this lesson, that's your goal. And that's your ultimate goal with the material, with the resource that you're showing. And same that what you would do with a unit. A lot of us backward plan. Oh, this is where I want to end. How do I get from there? Consider backward planning for your lesson as well. What is it that I want my students to do at the end of the lesson, at the end of this 45 minutes, 50 minutes, 80 minutes, 90 minutes? And then go backwards. Sometimes it gives you a full perspective of what you want to achieve with that lesson. So let's build some lesson plans, and I'm going to take a 5-second break and drink some water. I'm going to be giving you some examples for the checkpoints A, B, and C. And again, for my out of New York friends, novice, intermediate, and advanced levels. So my first example, and the examples are going to come from Reporteros. Reporteros is one of the rock stars of CLET, and it's a series that it's about to have its level 4 in Spanish, and I believe that the level 3 in French is coming. And it's a series that I'm excited to have been participating and being involved in since the very beginning. So for our little guys, our younger guys, or our novice students, they're not necessarily young, but they're young in their language learning. We're going to talk about describing people, and our theme is identity and social relationships. In the textbook, it's going to look at this, and on the left, it's our rock star. That rock star, it's La Borinqueña. It's a superhero from Puerto Rico. Doesn't get much better than that, especially if you have teenagers or preteens. They're going to love La Borinqueña. So that's my rock star. So the book, if you're using a book and you have something like this, you want to highlight it. You want the kids to be excited about La Borinqueña. But again, remember, we have novice students. So next slide, please. And I'm going to walk you through all of this. So, ¿cómo es La Borinqueña? Your unit is called Amigos y Familiares, friends and family. The theme is identity and social relationships, and the topic is family and social relationships. And then my inquiry question, or my essential question, is what makes people who they are? And identity is something that it's so intrinsic to everyone. We all have our different layers, our different aspects that makes us who we are. And all this information about what unit is it, what theme, before I get excited about identity, topic, and inquiry question, are in your unit plan. So again, if you have a solid unit plan, getting that piece of the puzzle done, it's going to be much easier. Let's go to the next slide. Your lesson. Your lesson is called ¿Cómo es La Borinqueña? It always helps to have an original name for your lesson and for your unit. So, because that's one way of getting the students' attention. My can-do statement, and look at me, I'm playing with colors because I want you to stay on the idea that the red, it's your language function, and the blue, it's your activity, what you're gonna do. And the length of the lesson is 50 minutes. It can be a little less, it can be, this is approximate. In my school, lessons are 43 minutes. But you can play with it because we all have a little bit of a routine. For example, I begin all my lessons with a cell check-in. So what I do, I work with teenagers, so I project memes. And today was Disney characters. And they had a blast saying they identified with Dumbo or with a witch or a princess. And these are 15-year-old kids and 17-year-old kids. They loved it. So it can be 50, it can be 43, that's approximate. And if you have a longer lesson, if you work with blocks, then it's going to be like 2 of these make your one lesson. But again, if you have a longer lesson, you want that beginning, middle, and end. So the beginning of our lesson, it's, like I said before, highlight the student's previous knowledge. And these are our novices. So let's talk about known superheroes. And the example that came to mind was Spider-Man is brave and hardworking. And with Spanish, I like to use a lot of neutral adjectives like inteligente or leal are words that are applicable to masculine and feminine. So I can use it with a bunch of different superheroes. Then after we have discussed and used, and you can definitely, let's talk about scaffolding. You can give your students a list of adjectives and tell them use 2 for each of the superheroes that they know. There's nothing wrong with giving the kids a little bit to work on. They're going to still have to read, understand, process and use, and that's absolutely okay. Then you're going to show them the picture of La Borinqueña. And students may or may not know about her. I understand that Marvel has some comic books from La Borinqueña, and so students are probably familiar or more familiar than we think of with them. And you can ask the students to create a list of characteristics about her. Like I said before, you can provide a list of adjectives, and they can even make a list of what she is and what she is not just by looking at them. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's the picture from the book of La Borinqueña. Again, now you don't have the double, you just have this page. And if you look at what I just said, is basically what the book is suggesting that you do. And it's using words that the students are already familiar with, like leal, abierta, inteligente, tímida, honesta, valiente, nerviosa. A lot of these are cognates. Kids are going to be able, no matter how big of a novice they are, they're going to understand most of this. They're going to get inteligente, tímida, honesta, valiente. You might have to explain. Nerviosa. So out of the 7, they're probably getting like that 4 of them, 3 of them, and you can work from that. So students can use the words and say what they think this superhero is. The middle of the lesson is going to be an interpretive reading. And I would say, feel free to read it multiple times and in multiple ways. Sometimes we just want to hand out a reading assignment and let the kids do the reading assignment. That's not right. Again, there's a lot of words in that reading that are not going to be clear to them. And sometimes what I do, and I learned this at another webinar, it's not my own idea, I tell the students, let's focus on what you understand. So I give them a chunk of the reading and I say, okay, what are you understanding? What are the words that you do understand? What are the ideas that you are getting? And I take it from there to build comprehension. And so sometimes just switching the way we process a reading works. You can also ask them to read it in small groups or read quietly. But I say, try to always be involved in the reading at least once to give them the support they need, because again, this is new information for them. Focus on the desired language function and focus on the structure in context. That's the inductive grammar. You want the students to, through the input that they're reading, you want the students to be able to get that concept that you're aiming to teach them. And our next slide, it's the next page in that double page. And there's my interpreted reading about Marisol Rios. It's very simple because this is a reading for your novice students. But if you look at it, it has 5 paragraphs and there's some cognates, but there's some words where they're gonna need some support. But your students are reading and they're understanding, and they can take it from there and they can demonstrate their understanding by making a list of characteristics of La Borinqueña and writing all these statements. Making this list is ideal for your novice learners. So the end of the lesson, you can ask them to do a little writing, a little presentational writing, and they can describe another superhero. Like the book is prompting us, write a short paragraph to describe the personality of your favorite comic book character. It doesn't have to be a superhero. It can be some character that they enjoy, and I am admitting that I'm not familiar with the most recent pop culture comic characters, but I would write about Garfield because I'm a cat person, for example. And a possible extension, if you're in need of, let's say, a little project, students can create their own superheroes and describe them using those language functions that you have been practicing in the lesson. I almost feel like I want to do this tomorrow, but it doesn't fit right now what I'm teaching, but it sounds like a fun project to do with students. And our next slide shows you, again, we're working with reporteros, and if you are in need of ideas and you go, you're going to get some ideas on how to use your resources. And funny anecdote, and I'll be quick because we have a lot of lessons. I have 3 more lessons to show you. A lot of these ideas were coming to me as I was doing this presentation. And then I would look at the book and, whoa, this is exactly the same thing that I was thinking. So it's good to have those resources there. But sometimes we think the same way. It's all about using what works for you. You don't have to use everything. So our next slide and our next lesson, it's about travel, and travel fits in the contemporary life anchor theme. And this is a sample of the textbook that we're using, and highlighted in yellow would be the lesson I am going to be working with. So at this point, students, this is your intermediate, low, intermediate, mid students. They have some knowledge. They can speak in a couple of sentences. They can create. They can ask questions. We are a little more confident. So at this level, we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to be working with a video. And we're going to talk about los viajes dejan huella, and it's traveling leaves a trail or a track or a prints that traveling leaves in you. And our unit is called De Viaje por Argentina, or Traveling Around Argentina. The theme is contemporary life. Our topics, there's multiple topics. Main topic, the most obvious, is travel. But then you'll see, because I'm going to share the video with you, it's physical environment, climate, weather, and geography. But lastly, it's also about technology, media, and social media. And this is why I love this video so much, because it touches so many topics in one 1-minute video. And your inquiry question is, what are the benefits of travel experiences? And all this information, again, comes from that unit plan. I repeat again, if you have a strong unit plan, your lesson is on good track because you have a lot of the elements already done. So our beginning of the lesson, or our lesson, sorry, it's the lesson name is Los Viajes dejan huella. Traveling leaves a print in our souls, I would add. Your can-do statement, color-coded. I can talk about the effects of traveling by expressing my opinion about the ideas on a video. This would be your 45, 50 minutes lesson. The beginning of our lesson, it's going to be ask students about travelers. They probably did a little bit of traveling as of learning about traveling as novices. You can talk about being a tourist and a traveler. How are they different? And then go to the next level. Why do we travel? Students can write a list of reasons. Because they're going to say, because we want to rest, because we want to see new places. And then it can get interesting. If you challenge them, they're going to give you more interesting answers. What happens when we travel? Well, we relax. We see new places. We meet people. And lastly, traveling and social media. That's all. When we travel, we take pictures and we post pictures. We share pictures with our friends through different social media groups. There's a video, and that's our Rockstar. When we do, I'm going to warn you, for some reason, these videos are really loud and we couldn't work with the volume. So when you see the video, just prepare for a loud volume. So that's our Rockstar. I would begin by presenting screenshots of the video, just one or several, because they can be very powerful. They can help you tell the story. And students can write. I use, for example, a lot of whiteboards, but they can just write on a piece of paper, if you like, a short description of what they see. What do you see? I see 2 people looking at the sky. I see 2 people that are outdoors, and they can describe a little bit. Remember, these are novice mid, novice low, depending on when you're teaching these. And you want them to anticipate, what is the video about? So our next slide, I would say watch the video multiple times. Again, it can be blah, 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 Charlie Brown adult, unless we pause to comment, pause, give them feedback, help them with words. And students can identify the purpose of the video and then write a short paragraph with their opinion. So they can interpret the video by identifying that purpose, and then they can follow up by giving their opinion. Let's watch the video now. Again, lower the level in your computers if you can.
¿Por qué viajamos? Queremos conocer lugares nuevos, culturas diferentes, personas extraordinarias. Queremos desconectarnos de nuestra vida diaria y conectarnos con nosotros mismos. Pero, ¿realmente es posible eso? Creo que lo más importante es disfrutar el momento. Sin likes, sin alerts, sin views. Hay que aprender a perderse. ¿Dónde están las stories de este viaje?
I think this video, it's so powerful in that minute and a half that it lasts. And for those of you that don't speak Spanish, there's words that our students can understand. Look at the time. Desconectar and conectar, so disconnect and connect. It talks about the most important is disfrutar el momento. So talking about living the moment, but then hay que aprender a perderse. We have to learn to get lost. And when you're talking about traveling, that to me, it's pivotal. We want to tell our kids, get lost in your destination and enjoy it. Don't think about your likes. Don't think about the views. Don't think about how many people are going to see your picture. Don't pose for your picture. Just enjoy your destination. And that's why I love that video so much. And I think it's going to really resonate in our students. So you want to probably, I would end this lesson by surveying the students on the effects of traveling, give them options, and start your next class with their results. And that way we're using their input as a source of information. You want to get them involved in the lesson and in providing information that way. We have 2 more lessons and we have very little time. Again, you get ideas from your teacher's edition that you can always use. In this case, it was a double period, like a block period. The next one is also a checkpoint B lesson. I'm going to go a little fast because I think that the last one that is for the higher levels is also so beautiful that we need to discuss it. But health, in this case, is almost mental health. And that is, it's almost May, and May it's National Mental Health Month, but what makes us happy? And there's a video about my recipe for happiness. And by this time, your students' prior knowledge is what makes them happy. You want to talk, you can give them a list of activities and they can react. They can say, makes me happy or bores me or makes me sad. And that's going to lead us to this video where the students talk about what, or these people talk about what makes them happy. Our unit, and again, I'm following the same format. I take this from the unit plan, my essential question, my topic, everything is from the unit plan. You want a strong unit plan. And then my lesson, next slide, we go into specific things that make me happy. My can-do statement would be about describing how I feel. And how do I do that? By making a list and comparing my list with a friend's. And that way you incorporate that interpersonal communication. And this is going to be your 45 or 50-minute lesson. Work with those feelings, work with those activities that make us happy. These students can tell you a list of things that make them happy because they're intermediate students and they can share their ideas with a partner. Then during the lesson, during the middle of the lesson, next slide, you're going to show your video and you're going to watch it again as many times as necessary, because you want to pause. And sometimes they don't get it, but if you stop at the right moment and you discuss the idea with them, they appreciate it. So you want to pause and you want to, again, scaffold that video as many times as needed. And also you want to model the desired language function. It's not just giving them videos and telling them the meaning of words. You want the students to feel comfortable producing the desired structure. And you're only going to get that if you model that desired language function.
En mi receta de la felicidad no puede faltar buena música para bailar, buena comida y pasar tiempo con mi familia y amigos.
A mi receta de felicidad no le debe faltar amigos y familia, viajar y conocer culturas y rincones alrededor del mundo y el compromiso para crecer profesional y personalmente.
Un buen tanto de optimismo, autoestima saludable y fe sin medida.
Amor propio, ejercicio y balance en lo que comemos y lo que somos.
Mi receta de la felicidad consiste en tiempo de calidad con mis seres queridos, el deporte y mi perro.
So different people, a great variety of people, ages and gender and all sorts of interests, say what makes them happy. And I like that it has a great variety of people because each of our students is very unique. And that gives them the assurance, or that makes them feel that they can tell what makes them happy. And that's what we want. I would make a word cloud at the end of the lesson with all the elements for a happy life from all our students. And that can definitely be something that can start conversations in the future. And our last lesson, we've been going from checkpoint A, novice, to our intermediates. It's our checkpoint C, or our higher level students. And it's about the languages that we speak. And we're going to talk about music and inclusion. And I actually used a little bit of this topic with my dual enrollment classes this week, and they love the idea that I'm going to present to you here. So this unit is called Las Lenguas que nos unen, or languages that unite us. The theme is identity and social relationships. And the topics is not just identity, it's about social justice and human rights. And that touches really the soul of our students nowadays, especially those higher level students. And the inquiry question would be, how can languages serve as tools for inclusion and communication in diverse communities? And again, all of this comes from the unit plan. Your lesson, again, Las Lenguas que nos unen, and I have two can-do statements for this one. I can understand videos about sign language by analyzing the various ways music can be inclusive. And I can explore more ways to be inclusive by discussing and comparing the ways to reach more people through art. And this is a 50-minute lesson that, again, could be longer because it's such a rich topic. So the beginning of the lesson, let's talk about inclusion in music and how can artists be inclusive with their music? Is it possible to be inclusive with music? And we talked a little bit about sign language, and is there value to sign language? It seems like a silly question, but you want to provoke them. You want to just touch the fiber and make them talk. And I'm going to present an artist that includes an interpreter that sings, not just in the music videos, but in the concerts. And I tell the students, that's how this artist makes sure that more people get the message in her music. And they absolutely love the idea.
A veces derribar una barrera es mucho más fácil de lo que imaginamos. El objeto que hemos traído es una foto de las manos de Beatriz, que bueno, es el signo de la unión, y creía que bueno, que era positivo pues demostrarlo así, que es la unión que ella y yo tenemos en el escenario, y es la unión de la lengua de signos y la lengua oral.
So this is not the music video, but when this artist is in concert, it's always the same interpreter. So this interpreter is always with her throughout her career to use sign language. And in this unit, there's also a conversation on sign language as a national language, and how some countries, Paraguay, it's one of them, maybe not many, but Paraguay includes sign language as a national language, along with their indigenous language as well. Sign language, then we talk about making using sign language to make music more accessible to all. And I would say that video where the artist was explaining, and she has so many powerful ideas, and she shows the picture of her interpreter's hands. I would watch it multiple times. Just because the students are at a higher level doesn't mean they don't require to listen multiple times. They require, you want them to get as much as they can. They can jot down ideas to have a conversation after. But sometimes we feel that we can just throw material at our higher levels and let them just work with it. And they still need our support. They still need our scaffolding. They still need us to guide them and to model whatever we want them to use. In this case, the function is expressing opinions with impersonal expressions. And I would model first, and then I would ask them to use it in their own sentences. And let's go to the end of the lesson. Again, think about what functions were the focus of the lesson, and you're going to use that to analyze, discuss, and compare. And students can analyze a quote. The video, this artist, Rosalind, she has a lot of great quotes. And you can give the students quotes and have them agree or disagree with a statement. And I always tell my students, it's okay to disagree. I feel that these kids, sometimes they feel that they can disagree for the fear of just coming across wrong. And I tell them, you can disagree, but be respectful. And that's what we want. We want the students to be able to feel confident that they can express their opinions. So let's summarize. Best practices when you are planning a lesson, you want to keep in mind always your unit plan, because your lesson, again, is a piece of the puzzle. Consider your resource, that video, that infographic, that reading, that poster, and what do you hope your students to do with it? Plan backwards thinking about that can-do statement. And when you think about that can-do statement, include the language functions and your evidence, your tasks. And I try to put on my students' shoes and do something. Do the task. How hard or not is it? How challenging is it? And sometimes I find that there's something that I need to modify or that I need to scaffold. It's always good to put on our students' shoes to see what challenges they can encounter. And with that, we are at the end of the presentation.